Hi, third graders. So I'm back to read a couple more chapters of Because of Winn Dixie. Remember, you're looking for examples of character traits. What kind of character are Opal, the preacher, her father, Winn Dixie, and then we still haven't met Gloria Dump yet, but when we get to her, one character trait that I was thinking about when I read the first two chapters was the preacher. And one thing I was thinking was he's compassionate, because they were talking about how less unfortunates they like to take care of and take in, and they were referring to Winn Dixie as a less unfortunate, right? Winn Dixie, looks pretty rough, looks like he hasn't had a loving home ever, and definitely needs some TLC, right? Some tender loving care. And so I'm thinking that even though he probably didn't really want to have a dog come live with them, he was definitely compassionate about allowing Opal to have Winn Dixie come live with them and for them to take care of and give Winn Dixie a very good home. So the character trait I was thinking was compassionate, and then those were all the examples that I would have put when I was writing the character trait that I think, the preacher, one of the character traits that I think, describes the preacher. Okay, so we're going to read a couple of chapters in our book Because of Winn Dixie. I started in on Winn Dixie right away, trying to clean him up. First, I gave him a bath. I used the garden hose and some baby shampoo. He stood still for it, but I could tell he didn't like it. He looked insulted, and the whole time he didn't show me his teeth or wag his tail once. After he was all washed and dried, I brushed him real good. I used my own hairbrush and worked real hard at all the knots and patches of fur stuck together. He didn't mind being brushed. He wiggled his back like it felt pretty good. The whole time I was working on him, I was talking to him, and he listened. I told him how we were alike. See, I said, you don't have a family, and neither do I. I got the preacher, of course, but I don't have a mama. I mean, I have one, but I don't know where she is. She left when I was 3 years old. I can't hardly remember her. And I bet you don't remember your mom much either. So we're almost like orphans. Winn Dixie looked straight at me when I said that to him, like he was feeling relieved to finally have somebody understand his situation. I nodded my head at him, and I went on talking. I don't even have friends because I had to leave them all behind when we moved here from Whatley. Whatley's up north in Florida. Have you ever been to North Florida? Winn Dixie looked down at the ground like he was trying to remember if he had. You know what, I said, ever since we moved here I've been thinking about my mama extra hard, more than I ever did when I was in Whatley. Winn Dixie twitched his ears and raised his eyebrows. I think the preacher thinks about my mama all the time, too. He's still in love with her, I know that, because I heard the ladies at the church in Whatley talking about him. They said he's still hoping she'll come back, but he doesn't tell me that. He won't talk to me about her at all. I want to know more about her, but I'm afraid to ask the preacher. I'm afraid he'll get mad at me. Winn Dixie looked at me hard, like he was trying to say something. What? I said. He stared at me. You think I should make the preacher tell me about her? Winn Dixie looked at me so hard he sneezed. I'll think about it, I said. When I was done working on him, Winn Dixie looked a whole lot better. He still had his bald spots, but the fur that he did have cleaned up real nice. It was all shiny and soft. You could still see his ribs, but I intended to feed him good, and that would take care of that. I couldn't do anything about his crooked yellow teeth because he got into a sneezing fit every time I started to brush them with my toothbrush, and I finally had to give up. But for the most part, he looked a whole lot better, and so I took him into the trailer and showed him to the preacher. Daddy, I said. He said. He was working on a sermon and kind of muttering to himself. Daddy, I wanted to show you the new Winn Dixie. The preacher put down his pencil and rubbed his nose, and finally he looked up. Well, he said, smiling real big at Winn Dixie. Well, now, don't you look handsome? Winn Dixie smiled back at the preacher. He went over and put his head in the preacher's lap. He smells nice, too, said the preacher. He rubbed Winn Dixie's head and looked into his eyes. Daddy, I said real quick before I lost all my nerve, I've been talking to Winn Dixie. Is that right? The preacher said, and he scratched Winn Dixie's head. I've been talking to him, and he agreed with me that since I'm 10 years old, you should tell me 10 things about my mama. Just 10 things, that's all. The preacher stopped rubbing Winn Dixie's head and held real still. I could see him thinking about pulling his head back into his shell. 1 thing for each year I've been alive, I told him. Please? Winn Dixie looked up at the preacher and kind of gave him a nudge with his nose. The preacher sighed. He said to Winn Dixie, I should have guessed you were going to be trouble. Then he looked down at me. Come on, Opal, he said, sit down, and I will tell you 10 things about your mama. Chapter 4. 1, said the preacher. We were sitting on the couch, and Winn Dixie was sitting between us. Winn Dixie had already decided that he liked the couch a whole lot. 1, said the preacher again. Winn Dixie looked at him kind of hard. Your mama was funny. She could make just about anybody laugh. 2, he said. She had red hair and freckles. Just like me, I said. Just like you, the preacher nodded. 3, she liked to plant things. She had a talent for it. She could stick a tire in the ground and grow a car. Winn Dixie started chewing on his paw, and I tapped him on the head to make him stop. 4, said the preacher. She could run fast. If you were racing her, you couldn't ever let her get a head start because she would beat you for sure. I'm that way too, I said. Back home in Watley, I raced Liam Fullerton and beat him, and he said it wasn't fair because boys and girls shouldn't race each other to begin with. I told him he was just a sore loser. The preacher nodded. He was quiet for a moment. I'm ready for number 5, I told him. 5, he said. She couldn't cook. She burned everything, including water. She had a hard time opening a can of beans. She couldn't make head nor tail of a piece of meat. 6. The preacher rubbed his nose and looked up at the ceiling. Winn Dixie looked up at it too. Number 6 is that your mama loved a story. She would sit and listen to stories all day long. She loved to be told a story. She especially liked funny ones, stories that made her laugh. The preacher nodded his head like he was agreeing with himself. What's number 7? I said. Let's see, he said. She knew all the constellations, every planet in the nighttime sky, every last one of them. She could name them and point them out, and she never got tired of looking up at them. Number 8, said the preacher, with his eyes closed, was that she hated being a preacher's wife. She said she just couldn't stand having the ladies at church judge what she was wearing and what she was cooking and how she was singing. She said it made her feel like a bug under a microscope. Winn Dixie lay down on the couch. He put his nose in the preacher's lap and his tail in mine. 10, said the preacher. 9, I told him. 9, said the preacher. She drank. She drank beer and whiskey and wine. Sometimes she couldn't stop drinking, and that made me mad, and made me and your mama fight quite a bit. Number 10, he said with a long sigh. Number 10, is that your mama? She loved you. She loved you very, very much. But she left me, I told him. She left us, said the preacher softly. I could see him pulling his old turtle head back into his stupid turtle shell. She packed her bags and left us, and she didn't leave one thing behind. Okay, I said. I got up off the couch. Winn Dixie hopped off too. Thank you for telling me, I said. I went right back to my room, and I wrote down all 10 things that the preacher had told me. I wrote them down just the way he had said them to me so that I wouldn't forget them, and then I read them out loud to Winn Dixie until I had them memorized. I wanted to know those 10 things inside and out. That way, if my mama ever came back, I could recognize her, and I would be able to grab her and hold on to her tight and not let her get away from me again. So we'll stop there. So I wonder if you're able to find any more character traits for the preacher, Winn Dixie, and for Opal. Hopefully you are able to create a picture in your mind and create a kind of like list of what kind of characters each one of these main characters that have been introduced to us so far are. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye.